purpose of the Flick-Reedy Education Enterprises is to promote individual moral responsibility through education. How do we do this? We study of history, philosophy, social studies, and economics. We do not dictate. We do not make statements as to what we think you should or should not do. We do not unduly burden this program with footnotes, references, or complete documentation. However, we do give sufficient data to bring this discussion into proper focus. We invite you to delve further into the necessary historical and statistical data to develop a deeper understanding of truth and a keener sense of individual moral responsibility.
Since the sixth defeat of socialist Norman Thomas for U.S. President, we have not had any substantial Socialist Party efforts on the ballot. Where have the socialists gone? Have they given up? Have those former socialists changed their mind about socialism? I'm afraid not. Consider the possibility that the socialists have taken a hint from their English Fabian cousins, that they've sought to infiltrate not one, but both of the major political parties of the United States. Oh, no, you say. They couldn't do that. Before you close your mind to that possibility, take the time to go to a good library and get a book that lists the political platforms of all the political parties that have candidates and a platform. Start back about the 1920s, which would include the socialist platforms that we mentioned earlier. To get the proper effect, copy the main points of the various platforms on separate pieces of paper. Then, for each 4 years, lay the platforms side by side. Now, as you get to the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, look at the platform of both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and compare them with the Socialist Party platforms of the 1920s. You will find a similarity of ideas in a great number of areas. The similarity has already been pointed out by Norman Thomas, who alleged that the major parties have adopted and put into effect and law all but a few of the points in the socialist platform. And what has not already been put into effect is now in various stages of consideration by one or both major political parties. Such a library study of the political platforms as has been suggested will have a sobering effect on all of us. Yet the record is there for all to see, read, and analyze. Whether for better or worse, the socialists have exerted a profound effect on American political, governmental, and economic life. Earlier it was pointed out that while all communists considered themselves socialists, not all socialists considered themselves communists. What are some of the distinctions that the socialists make? The socialists talk little about atheism, and many profess that they do not embrace atheism. They say that they do believe in and worship a God, and have religious convictions that set them apart from communists. Yet we might find deep concern for the materialistic goals sought by socialism as a form of atheism, just as we might apply atheism to the improper materialistic goal of misguided capitalism. We must be aware that putting God in second place to material things is a form of atheism. Many of the modern-day socialists are pacifists and do not believe in war or revolution. They decry the violence, force, and bloodshed of the communist ideology and practice. But, despite the fact that socialists do not embrace atheism and do not believe in violence, force, and revolution, do they, by peaceful means, seek to achieve the same social economic goals? It would seem from the evidence that they do. And it is from this viewpoint that many people consider that socialism and communism are identical twins, if not unity. Let's return to the history of socialism with our British cousins and dig a little deeper into history than our previous superficial study. England today, and for the past several decades, has the best-known socialist party and socialist government, with the Scandinavian countries, Italy, and France not too far behind. In England, the Socialist Party calls itself the Socialist Labour Party and took over political power in England in 1945. A spokesman for the Socialist Labour Party that year had this to say.
The Labour Party is the Socialist Party and is proud of it. Its ultimate purpose at home is the establishment of the social Commonwealth of Great Britain. We pledge ourselves to these ends. 1. Government ownership of industry, railroads, banks, land. 2. Government planning of production and full employment. 3. Government control of prices and wages and medical services. 4. A heavy progressive income tax. 5. Extremely heavy inheritance tax.
Do you recall the amazing parallel and similarity to the words of Karl Marx when he wrote,
"The proletariat will use its political supremacy to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state. Factories and instruments of production owned by the state. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank, with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Abolition of private land ownership. Central planning of production. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Abolition of all right of inheritance."
In 1948, the 100th anniversary of the publication of the Communist Manifesto, Britain's Socialist Labour Party itself published a centennial edition of the Communist Manifesto, endorsing it and showing it to be the common inspiration of Britain's socialism and Russia's communism. Again, it is pointed out that for the most part, Britain's socialist leaders do not endorse the atheism and violence of Russia's communism. Many close observers of British socialism feel that if socialism continues in Britain, sooner or later, the harsh measures of absolute dictatorship will have to be applied as they are in Russia. The British Socialist Labour Party controlled the government from 1945 until October 1951. Many enterprises were already operated by the government. On March 1st, 1946, the government took over and operated the Bank of England. There followed, one by one, the takeover of essential industries: coal, telecommunications, electric power, gas, railroads, airlines, bus lines, and all other transportation, the iron and steel industry, the hospitals and medical services. Central planning and production was established. Now here is an interesting point. The Socialist Labour Party had promised it would not attempt to control employment. Yet, in September 1947, the government issued the Control of Engagement Order. At that point, the government could decide who was going to work where, when, and at what jobs. Because it was unpopular, this order was withdrawn prior to the elections in 1951. But that didn't erase the impact of socialism when applied by bureaucracy under central planning. It left a bitter taste, which will not soon be forgotten. 2 years after the socialists had taken over, food rationing was making the British realize that the harsh reality of socialism was a far cry from the promise of a worker's paradise. Rations were short. Of course, World War II was hard on England, but socialism seemed to be an anchor to getting things going again. Ivor Thomas was a member of the Socialist Labour Party in Parliament. He announced his withdrawal from the Socialist Labour Party, and in his book, The Socialist Tragedy, said,
"Socialism, if continued, will spell the doom of progress and personal liberty in Great Britain."
Austerity became a way of life in England. To most of the British, it was just another word for poverty. Under England's socialism, instead of a condition of plenty, there continued to be a condition of scarcity and hunger. Socialist Labour Member of Parliament Alfred Edwards was thrown out of the party when he focused attention on the realities of the situation. In an article for the Reader's Digest, he told of a typical example of government mismanagement.
"The Labour Party Cabinet appoints the personnel of our industrial leadership. Hence you find that the man in charge of a large original department of coal was a former taxi driver who became leader of a taxi union. He undoubtedly had some talent as a union leader, but he certainly had no qualifications for running the coal industry."
How about the working man? How has he fared? An Associated Press story dramatized the pitiful position in which workers found themselves. The story said that the British Railway Union had just finished 2 years of negotiations with their employer for a wage increase. In January 1955, the union had to settle for a gain of 84 cents a week, about 16 cents a day. This increase brought their wages from $17.50 to $18.34 a week, with the higher-paid workers getting a few cents more for a top of $25.50 a week. Who was the employer? Of course, it was the socialist government. The American railroad man makes 3 to 4 times as much as his British cousin. Yet the socialists would have people believe they have created a workers' paradise. Since 1951, England's had a number of years under a government by the Conservative Party. Very little of the socialization accomplished during the 6 years of the Socialist Labor Party government has been undone or reversed. Among the major industries, only steel, whose management had not changed, was converted back to private ownership. And even the return to private ownership is not firmly entrenched. The important lesson we can learn from this is that once socialism has replaced the system of private enterprise, it is extremely difficult to root out and keep out socialism. It takes not only a change of governmental intent, but, more important, the strong will of a people, usually already weakened by the previous condition of servitude. The theory of socialism may be exciting to the intellect of many, including students and teachers. Glittering promises seem to blind the judgment of millions. They cling to the thought of something for nothing as fondly as an infant child clings to his bottle. But socialism's record, and we do have the record of history, is indeed a poor one. Socialism has not produced prosperity anywhere in the annals of history, and wherever it has been allowed to grow to its bureaucratic fullness, it's partially usurped or totally destroyed human freedom. If the Englishmen of the 1900s could have talked with our settlers at Jamestown and Plymouth, perhaps those 17th century folks could have altered the path of 20th century Englishmen by telling what happened with the common storehouse socialistic system. Have you noticed that when it becomes apparent that one socialistic experiment or another is going down the road to failure, the dedicated socialist never says,
It must be the system that's wrong.
He loudly proclaims,
We just didn't go far enough. We need to have more power. We need to spend more money. It's sure to work then.
Regimentation of man, control, tends to destroy man's initiative. Man assigned to a job and stuck there by a government or anyone else has no motivation to create or produce. Incentive is lacking. To achieve the expenditure of outstanding mental and physical human energy requires that it be generated from within. Initiative must come from within. Recall the last time you assigned your children, or perhaps grandchildren, to a task that was not to their liking. What happened? If they stuck to the job at all, they performed the task only so long and only with enough vigor to prevent punishment. And so it is with the grown-up child, the man. And when man, individually or as a group, or as a nation, slows down his productivity and creativity, less and less is produced. The most obvious conclusion after that is simply, you can't have what is not produced. Any time man tries to break a law of nature, he fails, and he pays the penalty. Or in some cases, other men pay the penalty, perhaps his children or grandchildren, but payment must be made. And from the payment or penalty, nature expects man to learn. If he does not or will not learn, he must continue to pay. Each person then must make up his or her own mind. Does socialism in fact violate the laws of nature? And having made up his mind, he is free to act accordingly, at least here and now in our United States. Wherever the freedom of choice has been denied or limited, then there has liberty been reduced or extinguished.
Yeah.